Okay, let's jump right into part 3 of this giant chicken coop. If you've missed part 1 or 2, there is a link for you down below. I'm going to be putting the finishing touches on this chicken coop so I can call it done, starting with the trim, which, to make my life easier, I pre-painted the siding before installing it, as well as pre-painted this trim before installing it. And you know what? Big high five to all you finished carpenters out there who do trim on a daily basis, because while this step is very easy, it was extremely time consuming. Although I didn't measure a lot of the times I would just hold my board up in place where I wanted it, mark where it needed to be cut, then go cut it, and then very quickly install it. And I try to change the look a little bit by adding thicker trim to all of the borders on the outside, and then making the trim thinner anywhere it went inside. Next, I moved up to those 2 side sliding windows and screened the inside. I used 1/2-inch hardware cloth for all of the screening so that if a predator can get up to it, they can't claw their way inside. To attach it, I used a staple gun. To make the coop look a little bit more tidy, I came back and filled in all of the nail holes, and then my mom came back and did all the touch-up paint. When I was building the coop, I left this side open intentionally so that I would have access to the inside of the coop to do some final details. But now that I had the access windows installed on the other side, I could now close up this final 4th side with the siding as well as the trim. And just a tip, if you're going to be piecemealing T111 siding together, make sure that your grooves line up. It's a small detail, but it's very noticeable even if they're just slightly off. Next was to cut a chicken door, which I made by making a series of plunge cuts with my circular saw. This door will stay permanently open, but then later I'll be building a second chicken door to the run portion, and that will be the door that the neighbors can open and close to let the chickens in and out.
Ruin my fun.
For this chicken door, you could go very simple and just do a rectangle. I'll tell you this, it will be much simpler to trim, because even though this shape is a lot cuter in my opinion, it's actually quite difficult to trim and getting all of those angles just right. So really the only tip that I have for you is to make sure that you take your time cutting those angles, and also use a level whenever you're installing it. Alrighty, chicken door is now done. Now to build a ramp so that the chickens can access the door. I'm going really simple on the ramp. I cut 2 2x4s as the outside framing members, and then cut a few more pieces of 2x4s as the inside bracing. After sticking all of that together, I cut a sheet of plywood to skin the top of it. Then I grabbed some 1x material that was left over from all of the trim work, and then used that as steps of sorts so the chickens can have something to grip onto as they go up and down the ramp. I showed my mom how to use a miter saw. She's calling herself Miter Mama. I threw a quick coat of paint on that ramp so that it could be drying, and then I moved on to making a chicken door for the coop portion. This is a really simple door. It's essentially 2x4s that are stuck to the inside of the studs, as you see, and then I skinned it using some leftover T111 siding from the coop portion. I built a very simple wooden railing system that I attached on the back, and then you can see the door can now just slide up or down. And let me tell you, whenever I was building this, the inspectors were keeping their eye on me.
Is it good enough for you? Does it look good enough for you?
They weren't letting me get away with nothing. And I actually made a mistake installing this entire door. I didn't think that I would be trimming it out. So the trim is actually set forward from the studs. If I were doing it again, I would push the entire assembly back by 1/2 inch or 3/4 of an inch so that it would be exactly flush with those studs. But live and learn. On to the screen door. I went ahead and made my own screen door because, well, it's a big rectangle, so it's very easy. But also, the opening I intended it to go wasn't a normal size, so it wasn't like I could just buy one off the shelf. So I first built this on the ground. As you can see, it's nothing but 2x4s. And then I moved it in place and hung it with a few hinges. And the good thing about making your own door is that you can make it to a custom size. So if you need it to be wide enough to, let's say, bring in a wheelbarrow, then you can very easily do that. After getting the hinges on and making sure that the door worked as it should, I added a barrel bolt so that the door could be locked. With the door installed, I moved on to installing the ramp. And looking back on it, I should have waited until I screened the entire run portion before installing this ramp, because trying to move around it while screening the inside was a huge pain in the butt.
Okay. Alright, chickens. The coop is open. I mean, once I get all my tools out of there.
All right, the last thing to do on this chicken coop is to predator proof it. So for the inside of the run portion or anywhere else screening is needed, I'm using the 1/2-inch hardwire cloth, and I believe it's 19 gauge. I would span this from stud to stud on the inside of the run and then use a pneumatic stapler to staple it in place. 2 tips for you from my experience. 1, definitely wear gloves. This stuff will eat up your hands very quickly. And then 2, it's definitely worth your while to have a pneumatic stapler for this step. Also, I found it useful to use a 2x4 in order to get those corners nice and sharp prior to cutting them off. As you can see, I just used a right angle grinder with the cutoff wheel inside of it to cut the screening where I needed it, around any corners, but also cut it to length. I would cut it to rough size prior to installing it, but leave it a little long so that I could come back at the end and cut it to the exact size that I wanted it. That takes care of the run portion. Now to take care of the perimeter to keep predators from digging under the coop. I'm once again using some hardwire cloth here, but this time in green. So once grass grows, it will be camouflaged. And the point of this is that if predators come up and try to dig under the coop, they're gonna go right up next to it, not 1.5 feet or 2 feet out from the coop and then dig. So they'll try to go up to the coop, dig down, meet the hardware cloth and not be able to. And yes, later my neighbors will come back and backfill up to this base plate so that you're not going to be able to see this hardware cloth. On the corners, I made sure to leave an overlap on both sides so that the corners are not unsecured. To join them, I would simply bend down one of the straight parts and fold it around the other to just grab a hold of it. And I want to say, yep, that's the last step, guys. There was a lot of details to this build, but it was very fun, and the chickens took to their new home very quickly.
Don't y'all want to go out?
As you can see, the neighbors are using the bottom side of the coop portion to hang the food and the water bowls.
There they go. Now they got it. Go on, babies. This was a big undertaking of a project, but it is completely doable. If you have a chicken coop on your to-do list of this size, know that it's going to cost you roughly 1/5 of the price if you build it yourself versus hiring it out to a contractor. I hope that these videos have helped you out if you have this on your to-do list. And on that note, I will be selling a full set of plans for this exact chicken coop on my website. So check in the description if you're interested. Other than that, I'm going to call it a wrap, give it over to the chickens, and I will see you next time. I just want to keep them. I like this one. Come here, babe. Get in my coat. Oh! Oh! Goodness me. Someone appreciates it.